A German officer stood in the darkness, staring at nothing. For months, he had performed this same ritual, scanning the Atlantic from his concrete fortress, searching for shapes that never came. The waves rolled, the fog drifted, the horizon remained empty. But on this night, something had changed in the air. Major Werner Pluskat commanded coastal artillery for the 352nd Infantry Division. His bunker sat high above a stretch of Normandy Beach that would soon earn a name written in blood. His responsibility was simple and absolute. If enemy forces appeared on that sand, his guns would destroy them before they could advance inland. If his position failed, the route to Paris lay open. The early hours of June 6, 1944, crawled past in tense silence. At 1 in the morning, the telephone shattered the quiet. His regimental commander's voice crackled through static, asking the same question he'd asked for weeks. Pluskat moved to his observation scope and swept the darkness again. Nothing, just the eternal rhythm of waves against sand. He reported the empty sea and returned to watching. His gun crews manned their positions in reinforced emplacements scattered along the bluff. The 155mm artillery pieces sat ready, ammunition stacked in careful rows. Below, on the beach itself, naval mines dotted the tidal zone. Steel obstacles jutted from the sand at precisely calculated intervals, designed to rip open landing craft hulls. Every defensive preparation had been completed weeks ago. Now there was only the waiting, and the waiting consumed him. At 2 in the morning, sound reached him before sight. A distant mechanical growl rolled across the water, growing steadily louder. Aircraft engines, not a few hundred of them. The growl became a roar that shook the bunker's concrete walls. Pluskat rushed to the observation slit. The northern sky erupted in streaks of light. Parachutes blossomed against the darkness like white flowers scattered by an invisible hand. Not dozens, thousands. The alarm went up across the entire defensive network. His artillery crews scrambled to their guns. The telephone rang again, the voice on the other end demanding immediate fire on the airborne forces landing inland. Pluskat's gunners began training their pieces away from the beach, swinging the heavy barrels to target the paratroopers. But his orders hadn't changed. The beach, always the beach. That's where the guns had to concentrate. That's where the invasion would be stopped or succeed. Yet the paratroopers were already behind him, cutting roads, seizing bridges, disrupting communications. The invasion had bypassed his prepared kill zone before the main assault even began. Dawn arrived at 5:30. Pale gray light spread slowly across the water's surface. Pluskat returned to his observation scope, sweeping the horizon one more time. His heart stopped. Ships. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of them. The entire horizon from his leftmost field of view to his rightmost was covered in vessels. Battleships, their massive silhouettes unmistakable even at a distance. Cruisers in tight formations, destroyers forming protective screens, transport ships in endless rows. An armada beyond anything his training or experience had prepared him to comprehend. They sat in neat lines, dark shapes against the lightning sky, stretching to what looked like infinity in both directions. His hands shook as he lifted the telephone receiver. Static crackled. His commander's voice came through, tight with tension, asking what he saw. Pluskat tried to find words adequate to describe what filled his vision. Before any response could come back through the line, the world exploded. The first salvos from Allied naval guns tore across the sky with a sound like freight trains passing overhead. The shells arrived a split second after the sound, slamming into the bluffs around his position with earth-shattering force. Concrete dust filled the bunker, the walls shuddered. Through the observation slit, he saw entire defensive positions disappear in eruptions of dirt and shattered fortifications. His battery commanders were already screaming into their field phones, waiting for permission to return fire. The order came. His guns roared to life. The 155mm pieces barked, sending shells arcing toward the distant fleet. Each shot created a concussive blast that rattled his teeth. But the Allied fire was overwhelming. For every shell his battery sent toward the ships, 50 came back. German positions erupted in fountains of dirt, steel fragments, and pulverized concrete. At 6:30, landing craft appeared, hundreds of them, churning forward through the surf in organized waves. They were heading directly toward his sector, straight for the beach his guns were designed to defend. He gave the order to shift fire. His battery commanders acknowledged. The German guns swung their barrels down, tracking the approaching boats. At 2,000 meters, they opened fire. Shells splashed around the craft, sending up geysers of white water. One landing craft took a direct hit and disintegrated in a ball of orange flame. But there were too many. For every craft destroyed, 10 more pushed forward through the gaps. The landing craft hit the obstacle field. Some exploded on mines, erupting in sudden violence. Others ground to a halt on the steel hedgehogs, ramps dropping prematurely. American soldiers poured out into chest-deep water, struggling toward the beach through a hell of their own making. The MG-42 machine gun positions dug into the bluffs opened fire. The distinctive ripping sound of German machine guns echoed across the beach, 1,200 rounds per minute tearing into the exposed troops. Tracer lines raked the waterline, forcing the first wave to scatter and dive for whatever cover they could find. The surf churned with chaos, yet they kept coming. More landing craft ground onto the sand. Tanks pushed forward, some bogged down immediately in the soft sand, others crawled toward the shingle embankment. Engineers sprinted with explosive charges, trying desperately to cut lanes through the obstacles under withering fire. Pluskat's heavy artillery continued firing. Shells slammed into the beach, blasting sand and debris skyward, shredding equipment in an instant. Bodies and wreckage littered the waterline. Then, a naval shell found one of his artillery pieces. The position disappeared in a single strike, silenced permanently. From his observation point, Pluskat watched the Americans pinned down behind the seawall and shingle. The waterline was choked with wreckage. Damaged vehicles burned along the beach, sending black smoke into the morning air. It looked hopeless for the attackers. But the landing craft kept coming, wave after wave spilling fresh troops onto the open sand, feeding reinforcements into the meat grinder. At 7:30, Pluskat asked his battery commanders for ammunition status. They'd been firing for an hour. The response was grim. At this rate, they'd be out of shells within 30 minutes. He called the regiment again, requesting resupply. The response was vague, non-committal. Other sectors were also under assault. Ammunition convoys were under air attack. The Allied naval guns adjusted their fire. The pattern changed, less random bombardment, more precise targeting. Spotters were guiding the fire now, feeding coordinates from observers on the beach and in aircraft circling overhead. Shell impacts marched up the bluff, closing in with frightening accuracy. Then the bunker took a direct hit. The observation scope fractured. Pluskat's view disappeared in a spiderweb of cracks. The concussive shock threw him to the floor. He lifted his head and saw smoke seeping through a fresh crack in the concrete wall. The fortress that had seemed impregnable was beginning to give way. He pulled himself up and checked with his remaining positions. 2 guns are left operational. Fewer than 40 shells remain between them. By 8 o'clock, the Americans began to advance. Small groups broke from the seawall and moved up through the draws, cutting into the bluff. They used smoke, covering fire, and sheer determination. His machine gun positions engaged them, but the volume of return fire was increasing.
American destroyers had moved in closer to shore, providing direct fire support with devastating accuracy. Pluskat watched his carefully prepared defensive network begin to collapse piece by piece. This was the moment every German commander on the Atlantic Wall had been told would never come. The moment when preparation met reality, and reality proved stronger. He had stared at an empty horizon for months, building confidence that if the invasion came, his guns would stop it. Now, the horizon had filled with more ships than he could count. His guns were falling silent one by one, and American soldiers were climbing the bluff toward his position. The invasion he'd been waiting for had arrived, and there was nothing left he could do to stop it.